This conference will now be recorded.
Are you looking at that clock? Yeah, that's throwing me off too. I'm thinking I'm waiting at schedule. So a majority of my staff are fully vaccinated. I wasn't planning on wearing a mask, but if there's anyone in the room that wants to wear a mask, so.
I don't mind staying for the record. Have it for a long time.
And we have a guy outside with the needle if you're not. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry. Sit. Lisa, you're better now?
Yes.
We're going to get started in just a second.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't mean to say it.
Okay, I'll sing.
All right, we will call the Friday, May 21st meeting of the Tampa Wastewater Program Policy Board to order. Roll call, Mr. Hustler.
Good morning, Chairman Justice.
Here.
Vice Chairman White. Here. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Beckman.
Here.
Commissioner Van Ostenbridge.
Here.
Councilman Dingfelder. Ms. Burks for Mr. McGill.
Here.
Councilmember Foster.
Here.
Commissioner Fitzpatrick. Ms. Boatright.
Here.
Chairman, we have a forum.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. We continue to have some new faces on our board, and I want to welcome, and I apologize, I don't know if we've had a meeting on Zoom or not, but we're going to welcome Councilmember Foster officially. So you can clap. Introduce yourself, Lola, tell us.
Hi, I'm Amy Foster. I'm a council member for this meeting. My first official meeting.
Glad you're here. Appreciate it. Item number 1, approval of changes to agenda. Do we have any changes? Sure. No changes to the agenda, but also do want to mention that we do have new staff, especially with Ron, Maya, and I. Congratulations, welcome aboard. Item number 2, approval of minutes from the February 19th meeting. Are there comments or is there a motion to approve? Motion from Beckman, second from Smith. Further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed, show passes unanimously. General citizens comments, any members of the public wishing to comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item number 4, Golden Mangrove Award presentation. Mr. Sherwood, thanks for that. Yeah, we're going to do a little staff presentation announcing the winners of the 2018 Golden Mangrove Award, where we give to our paid mini grant recipients that show an exemplary project completed with great benefits to the Tampa Bay Estuary. I'm going to turn it over to Sheila. She can present it to 2 folks that want to distribute.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you in person. So for those of you who may not know, I manage our Bay Mini Grant program. Bay Mini Grants are competitive cash awards that are offered to community organizations for projects that address education and restoration priorities in Tampa Bay. These grants are entirely funded by the specialty license plate that you see floating around town and you'll see in abundance outside. And so these grants are typically 1 year in duration. And then after that 1 year is up, our community advisory committee gets together and we'll vote on a Golden Mangrove Award winner. Now, as said, this is given to the most outstanding Bay Mini Grant project from that year. Since the pandemic was last year, our community advisory committee wasn't able to meet and to award this present the award for the 2018-2019 Golden Mangrove. So alas, we are getting back to some sort of state of normal. And in May, the community advisory committee was able to meet. And I am excited to announce that Ms. Jan Allen, our community advisory committee co-chair, will be presenting those awards this morning. So I will hand it over to Jan, who will be presenting the awards.
Good morning, everybody. We were
Jan, come on up here so people can hear you. Thank you.
normally, we're really looking forward to things getting back to normal, because normally the committee goes out and tries to visit some of the project sites, and we weren't really able to do that this year. And also some of the projects didn't lend themselves to that either, because they were done and then over, and there was no site to visit. But we're looking forward to the next go round where we can be a little more personally involved on site. We couldn't decide who to give the award to, so we ended up giving 2 awards, both of which we thought were very impressive. The first one was Restoration Award, and it was to the Boca Ciega Bay Vertical Oyster. My glasses. Let me go glasses so I can read my room. Terrible getting old. First one is to the Boca Ciega Bay Vertical Oyster Gardens, to Tampa Bay Watch, and 853 volunteers participated in this project, which is huge. And they participated in the construction of 1,500 vertical oyster gardens, and which used 2 tons of oyster shell. 600 of them were installed at the Gulfport Marina so that the public could see them. And then 492 were distributed to homeowners and homeowners associations so that residents could install them on their docks. And then homeowners were asked to monitor them, and within 3 months there was oyster growth on many of them. The committee was really impressed by this project because of the number of volunteers involved, the citizen science aspect of the project, and also by the potential of the oyster gardens themselves to positively impact water quality. And Eric, you're from Tampa Bay Watch.
Yep.
To accept the award.
Would you like to hand it off?
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We're really glad to hear Tampa Bay Watch is doing work that they do so much in the water segment to help improve water quality and educate everybody.
Speech time? Yeah, a boat trip I have to be happening for some field trip to Tampa Bay Watch here at 50 minutes, so I'll just go 45. Is that all right? But we would just like to thank you guys for this award. It means a whole lot to us. We strive to kind of do our best with these even these smaller projects like this. I'm in charge of the Oyster Recall program at Tampa Bay Watch, but the Vertical Oyster Garden program is also another one that I facilitate. And since getting this mini grant, we've expanded upon it. The citizen science aspect, Gulfport actually created a Facebook page, a citizen science Facebook page. They go out every 6 months with a pretty basic monitoring sheet, but are able to
look at all the vertical oyster gardens that they've put in place there at the marina, and check out, oyster growth, do some measurements, see if there's any green mussels accruing there. It's kind of those invasive species. But really, the community there has really embraced it. And since then, we've also handed out vertical oyster gardens to some other groups, or I should say, some other neighborhoods. Dana Shores up by the Courtney Campbell Causeway. A couple of our volunteers, Janet and Eli Rose up there, have kind of brought that to the neighborhood there. We handed out, I believe, over 150 vertical oyster gardens up there to, I want to say, 27 residents. I think they have about 25 up there now. So they're very ambitious. But the citizen science continues to come in as well. During the pandemic, when we were all kind of at home, on Earth Day in 2020, we sent out, leading up to Earth Day in 2020, we sent out a monitoring sheet for people, the private homeowners that were mentioned, those 85 homeowners plus people we had accrued since then, to do a monitoring of their vertical oyster gardens. The return was about 20%, so not as many as we had hoped, but people were able to go out during the pandemic and monitor their vertical oyster gardens and send that information back to us. Everybody photographed the vertical oyster gardens, so we could believe them when they said they had oysters growing on it and things like that. But all in all, the vertical oyster garden program continues. We look to expand it into the future. Right now, we're looking for a few more recycling, oyster shell recycling partners, and to get that program kind of off the ground and running. But once that happens, we continue to basically multiply it into the future. So thank you so much again. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Eric. Get a picture with all of the records.
Sure.
Hurry up so we can. That's very cool, that's expanding outside of the pond. Our second winner, we were really impressed by this too, because the Shoreline Stabilization project at Little Bird Key was a really big project, a Herculean effort. And the Friends of the Tampa Bay National Wildlife Refuge were the sponsors of this project, the grantees, but they had a lot of help because it was really a collaborative effort between the Friends of the Tampa Bay National Wildlife Refuge's Tampa Bay Watch and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Reef Innovations. So Eric was definitely involved in this one too. So it's kind of his award as well. The sponsoring organizations directed 110 volunteers in the construction and installation of 500 oyster recalls made of marine-friendly concrete. Each of these weighed 200 pounds apiece, so that's a lot of concrete to be moved. These were installed in a 500-foot line on the northwest side of Little Bird Key to halt shoreline erosion caused by tidal action at both waves. And the committee was just really impressed by the huge amount of coordination and sheer physical labor involved in making these things and moving them out there to Little Bird Key and installing them. And also in the project's impact in protecting the bird nesting habitat and in recruiting more new oysters to improve water quality there in the bay. So we have Barb and Dave Howard here to present from the Friends of the National Wildlife Refuge.
I do, yes. Okay. All right, thank you so much for this. We really, really, really appreciate that you gave us the big grant to help us be able to accomplish this. Little Bird Key is an island in the Pinellas National Wildlife Refuges, and it's on the west side of Pinellas National Wildlife Refuges in Tampa Bay, and it's a
So lots and lots of waves and stuff coming up. And we noticed over the years, so much erosion on that island. So we figured out that with Tampa Bay Watch's help, which we couldn't have done it without, we could put in these oyster domes that the company now wants called reef balls. So from now on, we'll refer to them as reef balls. And like Jan said, it's a 500-foot wall against the northwest side of the island. And it provides erosion control and hard-bottom habitat for fish and wildlife, and water quality improvements, and hopefully helping the seagrass in both the state of Maine too. So, and the birds there are just amazing. We get so much nesting there consistently over the 15 years that we've been doing bird counts. So I brought you some pictures. This is the island. You can see it's just an example of some of the erosion that was going on. We lose mangrove trees every year. Tampa Bay Watch, like I said, they were wonderful. They coordinated the volunteers. They talked to them each day about, each session they had, about what they were, doing in the community and about the refuges. So that was their orientation in the morning, and also how they were going to build them. Here you can see the guys, girls prepping the domes before they're going to pour the concrete in them. This is the pH neutral cement that they use so that the sea critters would like to attach to them. Domes on the left there, and a gal filling it with a bucket from a wheelbarrow, which was a huge amount of work. There's more of them working. The ones on the right are watching paint dry or cement. There's a bunch of the domes. There wasn't all of them, but a big stack. They get loaded onto a barge where they get floated over to the island. So it's about a foot to go to our city. And here they roll them off the boat, and they are lighter in the water, hopefully. And then they get into position. So you can see that the sea critters are starting to attach to them. And what you can't see in there is that there's little fishies all over the place. So all the fry are around there, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. We haven't seen any more loss of mangrove trees since we put them in, which is a great thing. Here, when it's high tide, they're underwater. Another view of it. You can see the great egret there in the distance, looking for fish. Thank you, Benny Grant.
Thank you all so much for all the hard work that both organizations do. We really appreciate you, and Wastewater program wouldn't be able to achieve our mission without the support of community organizations like yourselves. So if we could grab a picture with all the winners, and Jan, if you would come up to me in the picture.
If the board would like to take a picture all together, we actually have another round after this. Great opportunity. Joe, Mike, do a little photo with everybody. Sure. Joe, please. Sure. Tell us where you want.
I think that might be best back there. There's a little bit more space.
And real quick, I want to thank you, Jan, for all your hard work in the CAC and everything you do to help make the Wastewater program move forward. So thank you.
Start the line here and go that way. So we're basically just.
You'll be in the corner.
I'll be in the corner. You can do that without talking. 1, 2, 3.
So before everybody sits down, also one more thing we wanted to announce. This past weekend, we were generous enough to choose us as an environmental organization to receive the donation raised through that and send us a check and a half here. And love to get a thank you picture to them that we can send along with the note based on that award. We're planning to use this on a project that has either habitat restoration and fisheries benefits in Lower Tampa Bay. Perfect timing in light of recent events.
Just stand.
You guys want to be part of the photo? Oh,
Nicely done.
Thanks, sir.
Well, we were so excited.
Thank you. As you noticed, the theme for the baby grant, the mangrove work was oyster restoration primarily. And we've got a target about 50 acres of oyster reef restoration over the next 10 years. So a lot of work is leading towards those efforts to bring back to the shellfish.
Yeah, the shoreline stabilization is incredible. The 1,500 oyster, the marinas. But what I really loved was the 492 homeowners that we connected with. That's huge. For spreading the mission. So that's great work, everyone. Really appreciate the help. All right, ready to move on? Yeah. Action items on the agenda today. Item number 5, acceptance of quarterly financial reports. Mr. Boston.
Yeah, the first of my 2 reports was the quarterly financial report for the period ending March 2021. This is the end of our 2nd quarter. The way this report is laid out, if you look in the first column, it's got our approved initial budget that was developed back in August of last year. The current March 31st numbers, and then the variances in the last 2 columns. The first footnote I had on here was the conference revenue, which wasn't in the original budget, but we're up to $17,000 in conference revenue as we get this report. We're expecting quite a bit more of this money going towards our basis and Association National Historic Program conference in October, and we're expecting quite a bit more revenue and sponsorship towards that conference before the I didn't footnote, but I want to point out just below that contributions to donations, we received an unexpected $10,000 in donations, and I'm adding that to the report. And for this point fiscal year, we're at almost 50%. We should be. We also received all of our member dues from the local government, so thank you very much for your contributions this year. On the expense side, really, the only thing I footnoted was the auditing, because we went over budget by $2,500, and this is due to exceeding the threshold for the federal single audit, so there was additional audit work that had to be done that cost us an additional $2,500. Well, I'm going to be talking about that in the next report where we can make that up. And down on the bottom, if you look towards the bottom, it says tech comms contracts and consultants were 37%, which is a little behind for this fiscal year. We think a lot of that has to do with COVID and what that would be able to make, how that's impacted the work that's being done in the field. So total expenditures were 39, 40%, a little bit behind, but any work that has been done so far will be made up in the next 6 months or roll over into next fiscal year. With that, I'll be happy to answer.
Questions? Discussion this morning? If not, is there a motion to accept?
Move approval.
For motion from Foster, second from Beckman. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item number 6, acceptance of the mid-year budget amendment proposal. Mr. Austin.
All right, so this report is laid out very similar. We have our approved budget in the first column, our proposed mid-year amendment in the second column, and then the variances, dollars and percentages in the last two columns. If you look on the revenue side, we're adjusting down federal revenue and fees and contracts by roughly $296,000. We're going to reduce the budget. A lot of that is tied to the contract services consulting, again, because these are multi-year projects. Whatever that doesn't get completed between now and the end of the fiscal year will be done next year. So in all likelihood, those numbers will go up next fiscal year. If you look at conference revenues, we put $50,000 into the budget to cover what we anticipate in the way of revenue, and also added in that $10,000 we got in donations. On the expense side, if you look in the third column, there's a couple of categories where increase in the budget: personnel by $2,000, insurance by $1,300, legal services, auditing down at the bottom, and accounting and payroll services. However, we're reducing travel and conferences and capital outlays, which makes that a wash. So we're shifting excess money that we don't need from travel and capital outlays and moving it into those other categories, which really is the net difference. So it's not changing really much. The big difference is if you look toward the bottom of the expenses, contracts and consultant services, we're reducing it from 2.1 million down to 1.8 million into the lag time and the work that's been done and so forth. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Discussion? If not, is there a motion to accept? Second. Motion by Smith, second by White. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Show of passage unanimously. Item number 7, approval of the final FY 2022 EPA annual work plan. Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, so starting on page 17 of the packet is the background on the finalization of the fiscal year 2022 work plan. So this is our annual plan that would begin October 1st. This is a formal submission that we provide to EPA during the summer months prior to the start of our fiscal year. It's the official cooperative agreement for EPA that matches federal appropriations with the interlocal agreement contributions from the office group. So we presented the draft version of this work plan at the February meeting, and the core tenant and projects that were outlined at that point have not changed. What has changed and what we've updated in this work plan is 2 tables of both the potential contributions for next year based on the current interlocal agreement as it is currently written in statute, and then any differences that might occur with full execution of the 2021 interlocal agreement update that we just finalized at February's last board meeting. So our plan moving forward is we would submit based on the current contribution levels in the interlocal agreement as provided in 2015. And then once the 2021 update is fully executed and submitted to the counties, we would formally submit an amendment to that application to EPA. This would help with timing and making sure everything jives at the start with the October 1st beginning of our fiscal year. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but many of the projects that we're focused on are priorities in terms of addressing issues in Old Tampa Bay, as well as making strides in terms of our habitat restoration initiatives on freshwater wetlands, some hard bottom live on habitats in both the city of St. Petersburg and Pasco County. Education components are focused on looking at ways we could create a education model for stormwater workers within each municipalities to improve management of tidal tributary systems that are basically the important arteries and filtering systems. Additional updates of voter education guide, as well as some projects, funding for projects that align well with what we received through the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund call this year. The funding is going to be distributed from some of our work plan projects that align with those priorities in Tampa Bay, and updated economic valuation for Tampa Bay, updates to the loading information throughout the day, focused on atmospheric deposition. So again, not really anything new in terms of projects, but just wanted to highlight those updates in terms of making it clear that the application that we will be submitting is based on the current interlocal agreement, and we would formally submit an amendment to EPA once 2020 update. I'd be happy to address or highlight those tables in the work plan.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So you're submitting the our member contributions based on 2015 forward, but 2021 that you're going to move forward has the same commitment from us as stated, right? It hasn't changed.
There's no changes to the district's contribution. What has changed in the approved version of the interlocal agreement in the February meeting, the distribution to the other member of local government.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Further discussion? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed, show of hands. And there's a usual check on our box of things to do this year. Item number 8, private sewer lateral social marketing campaign. Ms. Burke.
Good morning. You have previously approved an award to Marketing for Change to help us complete this work, to help educate homeowners who are interested in voluntarily replacing their private sanitary sewer lateral lines. That agreement is funded through 2 funding sources. One is a grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, a 319H grant that has been matched with contributions from Pinellas County and their municipalities through their wastewater stormwater partnership. Additionally, in prior work plans, you approved $50,000 to help educate the public on issues surrounding private sanitary sewer laterals. And so this request is to put that money that was previously included in a work plan for this topic and add it to the contract that we have in place with our existing contractor, Marketing for Change. So our existing contract with Marketing for Change provided some basic services to help us kick off the sanitary sewer lateral campaign, including 6 digital ads, social media shareables, 3 printed pieces of collateral like brochures or bill stumpers, and then some strategic direction on the landing page. After we've conducted the in-depth stakeholder interviews and focus groups with homeowners, we have that better social science data that we look for to create our behavior change campaigns. And so we identified some additional needs that we can direct that work plan funding towards. So this request is to add $15,000 to the existing agreement. And what that'll get us is some of these additional services, including campaign brand identity, copywriting for that website that they were previously providing consulting direction on, some infographics and animated video explainers explaining about private sanitary sewer laterals and specifically the sewer scoping process. And then some support for directed outreach to the trusted intermediary that was identified as a result of that research, which is home inspectors at the Florida Annual Association of Building Inspectors Conference, which is occurring here in the region later this summer. And then really amplifying the presence on social media and extending the ad buys, and then making sure that we are reporting on the effectiveness of the campaign through enhanced metrics. So that's the request that's before you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the project or this request.
We have questions? Yes, ma'am.
In session with Ed, we kind of batted around a concept and outside of our particular responsibility, but because of the audience, if I'm going to take a little liberty to share that, I think it would be a wonderful point of discussion for the communities that we represent to take up the thought that because of all the real estate transactions, that this issue be looked at and made part of properties that are being transacted. And it could be a shared expense of the buyer, the seller, and maybe you give them something like 6 months or a year to do the remedial work, but that, through inspection, they have to prove that the work was done. So there are so many people crossing that gate right now. Would there be a possibility for us to maybe bring into a workshop or something, the thought that might give the communities the opportunity to take those back to your community and really expand and impact this issue? If it's important, there's no better time than now to start making that happen because so many people are hungry to buy and sell property. And we've done it before, with other issues in property as part of the sales transaction. If there's an appetite for that, I would sure love to maybe at our next agenda bring that up.
As far, what do you, I guess I'm not sure what
So because we're doing the grant, we're making people more aware, there's grant money, there's going to be advertising money. Every piece of property that gets transacted in our community could have as part of the sales agreement that during the home inspection, an analysis was done or the data engaged property required. And if it is found that the lateral needs to be replaced, whatever the language is in the real estate world, we don't want to get into their world, but it's stated that it shall be replaced within a year of the transaction. And however they split the cost, maybe the buyer pays for half of it, the seller pays for half of it. Maybe it gives them access to the grant and puts them in the front of the line. I don't know. But what a great opportunity for us as a community to address this issue in the tailwind of all the real estate transactions and allow the buyers and the sellers to really understand that it's a responsible contribution to the quality of our water and our environment.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what the education campaign is all about, is making the buyer, probably more than the seller, aware that this is a question you should ask during that process, just like you asked about the roof or the HVAC or plumbing or electrical, any of those kind of things. Requirement is a whole other level. And we actually had a discussion at our commission meeting a few weeks ago, because we've done this whole stormwater partnership with all our 24 municipal partners. And we paid out of BP money, out of our money a few years ago, we paid for an I&I study countywide. And we found a few hotspots that we were looking at 4 different ways of attacking this problem, including the requirement of, as far as checking that box off at a transaction. That brings up a whole, it's a political firestorm that every realtor organization in the world will fight you on, adding something to that list. But that's why we've taken the education approach to it. And we were also talking about requiring, if you're doing major rehab to your home, as far as adding a bathroom or rehabbing the kitchen or something like that with plumbing, that would be that inspection. It was interesting. I didn't know, and you've probably seen this in St. Pete, that once you have the initial lateral put in 1960, when you have the house done, it never has to be inspected again, even if you go from a 1-bedroom, 1-bath house to a 10-bedroom, 10-bath house. That same lateral is there and it's never been inspected. So it's a very layered issue. But I guess the question is, like, if we're talking about requirement, then it's either a county ordinance or likely a state law, and then just the reality of it happening is that the state legislature requiring that is just not.
I would like to teach, that's why I want to keep it within our organization. This is important to us, and we have the transactions. I understand that the real estate, organization doesn't want to be, hit in the heel, but this would be a cost shared by the seller and the buyer, and we would give them a year or whatever time, you guys would feel is appropriate for them to show that they have accommodated the requirements. We are chasing our own shadow here, doing little bits and pieces. Why would we miss the opportunity where everybody has to come through this gate to not get the community to participate? And, they can access the grant and petition that. But I think that, we need to do a meaningful program. And I understand there's always going to be political pushback if it's change and money isn't moving around. But the cost of property, let's, say the cost of property right now is transacting at an all-time high. And I think that there is room for these costs to be associated in the seller-buyer transaction to There's no better time to bring it up than now, and I think that if we are really serious and committed to meaningful impact, we have to kind of bring the real estate community or other financial aid parties together and talk about $50,000 and what is that going to do with the overall, impact of this problem? Are we serious? And are we going to take the opportunities to continue to lean into this, or are we going to keep dipping our hand? My thought, I'm not an elected official, so I get to say those words out loud. I understand what you guys have to deal with, but I just really wanted to share that as something that I think deserves some more conversation.
I totally agree with you, but as the municipality that does have a federal ordinance, Commissioner Justice probably has more history than I do. I do remember the county-wide wastewater work group or whatever explored this option at least for a year or more. And ultimately decided that the sales transaction wasn't the right time. I will tell you, he's absolutely right. It's a political firestorm. We were required in our, planning for our sewage spills to pass a private lateral ordinance. And even with that as a requirement, and grant programs to pay for that in a specific pilot area where we saw a lot of I-9, huge organized pushback. I think we should explore it, absolutely. I will just tell you that when the realtors come out in force, it's almost impossible to get anything passed.
But if there's no cost impact, then why would they?
It slows the transaction.
I
Right
did,
now,
I did just put it in for more years, and it, as a city, we kind of landed on, if the county would do this, and it was even in all municipalities, and it wouldn't impact one municipality, that was the best way to go. And it was decided against doing that based on a number of factors, but.
And just FYI, we have a meeting next Thursday, the 27th, of the Stormwater Wastewater Partnership. It will be online. It's also in person at SPC, Summerall campus, for an update. And this was a effort that we started back in 2016 of getting all the technical folks in each wastewater, stormwater department, each of our 24 cities, our county. We have a couple of private systems. They had, for years, really not talked to each other. And so when we had these massive spills and rain systems in 2015, we had a city that would have major issues, and the city right next to it would have pump trucks sitting there, and they didn't know what resources. So we got everyone together, and so now everyone talks together. They meet, the smart technical folks meet regularly, and then the political people meet once every a few times a year to kind of go through these policies. But the way we've addressed it, and we're still talking about that requirement as far as at the sale. It's just about how much energy you want to put into that versus others. What I think we're moving forward with, we haven't set a policy yet, is that I&I study showed a few hotspots on our map that we, in our unincorporated areas, we control. And what we're looking at doing is, as we're going and relining our pipes, we know there's neighborhoods in there that we can go in and say, all right, we're going to be relining the pipes through your backyard. Now's the time to do a smoke test on your pipe. And then if we find an issue, some of them, it's really, quite frankly, it's just easier for us to pay for it straight out rather than do a rebate or a grant program. In my area, it's not a high income area. And so that's some of the issues also is when we start getting into these. That was it. Well, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off on everything. But one of the things was like, one of the proposals was actually to go in on these hotspot areas and actually go on people's property and test those lines with or without their permission. That obviously is another big issue for folks getting comfortable with that. But anyway, we looked at the requirement for sale, requirement at rehab or expansion, and then as far as a rebate incentive type program. So we're still exploring all those kind of things. I just think the forcing at a sale is always a huge deal, and it's maybe the exact right thing to do. But I think the way we get at it from our perspective is educating folks so that the buyer asks the question. They can always say, we want a lateral inspection before I pay. Right now, people are just buying from a picture they see from Chicago. Something like 2/3 1/3 of the buyers, we just had a presentation yesterday. One-third of the buyers this past year were all from out of state.
And that's exactly to my point, even though we've talked about it in the last couple of years. What's happening now and the dollars that people are willing to pay for properties because they're so few for sale and so many that want to buy, no better time than now to bring it forward. It shouldn't slow the process down to something that is allowed to be executed within a year. However, the real estate agreement is, maybe the standard is it's split. Seller and buyer may have, it has to be done in a year. We send out an inspector. But my point is this, I think that one, the timing is great to look at. Two, from my perspective, and again, I'm not an elected official and I really respect what, forces there are, battling in all of the movement of decision making. But gosh, we as an organization are committed to the quality of the environment and the water. And if we can't get the entire community to participate in something that is wholly impactful, and we can mitigate this exponentially more quickly through this kind of an approach or something like it, I think it's almost criminal that we don't bring it up to talk about it, regardless of how many times we talk about it. Well, because today's a different day and age. So I want to see what we do to always be at the forefront of the conversation, to inspire further investigation, to be creative in our solution. Because we have a very high responsibility. There's people that may not want to be bothered at a real estate transaction will absolutely want to know what's going on with their water quality at that point that we can't afford to, say that. So we look at this with us as you guys, we look at the picture, and I want the future 30 years or 40 years or 50 years to be as bright as it's been, and it takes the kind of outside money. I am so appreciative for you guys who have good time to talk about it.
No, but
It's very important.
you are absolutely 100% right. It's a critical issue that we've seen the impacts of.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. Smith, we are like-minded in many ways, and we certainly share a common goal when it comes to water quality. I'm a member of the Association of Realtors and an active realtor, largest property rights advocacy group out there. In addition to property rights, we do look out for our self-interest as well. And this would complicate real estate transactions. Council President, of course, Foster, is correct. You're going to see a very organized, strong pushback against this from users.
Why is it different than checking a box for radon or having to remediate asbestos prior to a sale or some of the other big ones that finally got to a head from a governmental perspective? It's just that's it. This is what we're doing. Buy it, don't buy it. But you got that responsibility.
So of course, we would love to remove those boxes for example, by the real estate transaction as well. But those are battles that we lost along the way.
But at some point, and you would be a great person to head up a committee, to review this. Because at some point, we have to exercise a little bit of grace and relax what's best for us in behalf of what's best for, in this case, the water quality and the longevity of the quality of the community. And so I can hear you. I totally get it from a business perspective. But maybe it's time that we start using some of our promotional dollars to change the thoughts and minds of special interest groups so that they come to the table with a even more exponentially impactful program.
And I understand where you're coming from, and to be quite honest, it is also that, water quality is obviously beneficial. Water, right? However, you would have a better one spitting into her.
I'm sorry. Some of my friends used to be real.
Yeah. I hope realtor testified that it used to be friends.
I don't know if some of your friends used to be realtors or some of our realtors used to be
Some of
friends.
our friends used to be realtors. Yeah, however it goes, I think it's time for all of us to just revisit it with an open mind and an open heart. I mean, if people from Chicago are buying sight unseen, this would be a great window, then it's short-lived. Let's take a look at it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is, sometimes it does take some, but quite frankly, before 2015, people didn't know what a lateral was. I mean, if you ask a resident, what's your lateral? Have you checked your lateral? They would go, what are you talking about? And then, all right, well, I know there's a pipe there. I didn't know that was my responsibility. That's a city pipe. Why isn't the city taking care of it? So, yeah, it's part of that. And I think Maya, this thing is going to educate folks to know, one, a half lateral, what is is it? Why is it so important? No, you can't just open the valve when you have rainy season and let all the flood water in. Some of those basic things, which we've heard some of those horror stories. Yeah, my backyard floods. I got a second, what's it, the drain out, what's it? Clean out installed in my pipe so that my plumber can, yeah, it gets heavy, I just open it up and the water. I mean, we've heard some of those stories. So this is part of that cycle of education to where that is. When was the last time the roof was checked? When was the last time, I had air conditioning? It has a lot of room check. We want, once consumers start asking that, then the realtors will follow. It's just, but right now it's a wall, but go ahead, Matt.
So my offer is to come back to the board at your next meeting to really provide you an overview of the research that we've done so far in the campaign, which will be rolled out over the summer. But your instincts are very much correct that buying a home is a really important triggering point when homeowners are more open to this messaging about repairing and replacing. But our stakeholder interviews and focus groups, we did reach out to realtors. We did in-depth, 45-minute interviews with a variety of real estate agents and heard much of what the commissioner is saying. So what our campaign is doing is focusing on these trusted intermediaries who are part of that transaction process. So it is still very much a voluntary effort. But we're also talking about optional contract language and outreach to realtors as another trusted intermediary, again, on a voluntary basis, but ways to continue that education process. And then the other thing that I'm doing is I'm working with the different commissioners who are considering these different policy options. So, for example, Ed has a policy brief that we wrote up on the screen right now. And the idea is to use the research that we've conducted here to help inform the commissioners as they consider these different policy options to figure out which might be most effective. So we're hopeful that it results in things like more rebate programs going in place, or a find and fix program, or potentially a transaction, a point of sale kind of thing. So that's the idea, is to really take this work and not let it stop at the education stage, but make sure that it's really useful and applied throughout the region and in our policies.
Love it. And you just turned something which I keep promising them to launch. But just like the radon fee, everybody pays to fit in. What if we, instead of going and saying we're going to target a property, if everybody that's transacting pays a minor little contribution to a fund that then would give you the money to go into your community, and as you stated, it would maybe be easier if we just went in and replaced the target hot zones, something like that. But gosh, guys, I really feel like this is a great opportunity for us to be impactful more than the little peripheral impact that I think we're taking now. We could really make a big impact on the problem.
And understand where you're coming from, your heart's in the right place. But ultimately, it's going to be received as added regulation and tax approach.
What about when those people want a glass of water? Can we get their attention then?
Ultimately, that's how it's going to be received. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's really important. And I think in order to make change and push against realtors or whatever industry doesn't want this, you have to start talking about it and getting people educated. I would ask, what's an average price of an inspection? I have no idea. And then I guess the price to remediate it would be variable. But I was thinking, rather than going up against realtors or whatever, and our state preemption stuff, what about the insurance? That the home insurance would give you a discount on your home insurance if you have a lateral inspection. Has anybody attempted it from that angle? I mean, I don't know, but I like better understand realtors and their issue with keeping people safe on grade out inspected. And please explain to me the balance between safety and money. I just need to understand that.
Yeah, and this is not to, say all realtors or get into that kind of conversation. It's just the association, as far as anything that's going to slow the process, whether it's another inspection, and I have no idea what an inspection costs, or if you call today, get one, how long would it take you to get? I don't.
The thing is 250 on average.
And how available are inspectors? Like, if you're saying
jobs.
what I'm saying is that, like, if you're
You're a labor.
Right now you have realtors, every realtor will tell me that I can put a house on sale Friday and I'll have an offer on Saturday and close on Monday kind of deal. So if you're telling me it's going to be 7 to 10 days, that's really where the issue is, where the delay is.
Little box check, radon, lightning roll, for sure.
More boxes you check.
I'm just telling you.
More time it costs. And you're all the same folks who will come to us and tell us that housing costs are too high.
I'm not
Right?
gonna.
We don't have a workforce out there. We don't have affordable
I'm
housing.
not gonna tell
We
you.
have to add regulations and taxes.
Protections are different.
We can justify all of these, but ultimately, this is
All
what
right.
drives up the cost.
So before we completely off track, we have an agenda item on the dais about the marketing campaign for education of laterals. Maya, did you have anything else on explaining? We have questions on the actual agenda item.
Do I get the motion right now?
We don't have a motion yet.
Okay.
We have an agenda item.
The recommendation is to authorize the executive director to amend the existing contract with Marketing for Change to include up to $50,000 for additional services.
We have a motion by Smith, second by Beckman. Is there further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. I'm sorry, did you?
I just want to mention with our strategy mastery program, much like our other social marketing campaigns that have been highly successful, like student group or bee party and residential fertilizer ordinance campaign, is to create momentum around these issues, get the conversation going, and then all options are still on the table and addressing private laterals and sanitary sewer overflows in our communities. And I think us talking about it is opportunity in itself to try to address the situation with solutions that work best for our community. So that's all our role in the mastery program is. That's what our seed funding is hoping to support. Those initiations and catalyst discussions, which are important because it's a primary issue.
This is all about, again, making folks aware and growing that personal responsibility. Florida's big property rights, but it's also about respecting your neighbor and their property rights as well. And so the damage you potentially do does directly impact your neighbor. So we'll look forward to having seen those actual collateral materials and everything at our next meeting.
Wonderful.
Item number 9, approval of 2021 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund project.
So as you all are probably aware, the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund is an important way that we involve you all as our partners in the community in implementing our CCFP. This grant program is released, a call for proposals is released annually, and this year it was very competitive. We did receive 18 proposals requesting about $1.8 million. Unfortunately, we only had about $670,000 available for to support projects. So indeed, it was very competitive. You'll see here in the agenda item what the findings of the review committee were, and then Ed's recommendation to you all. We're recommending that of those 18 applications, we support 7 of those projects. Living Shoreline at Eckerd College, fish tagging project to understand the function of Robinson Preserve as a nursery for sport fish, homeowner association in Old Tampa Bay, the Felipe Bay Stormwater Quality Improvements Project, a project to better understand the status and trends of sharks, particularly in lower Tampa Bay, the important shark nursery, and so to get some more information on how they use the habitats in that part of the bay. As Ed mentioned earlier, updating our economic valuation of Tampa Bay, a project to understand how atmospheric deposition is contributing to nutrient loads, particularly in Old Tampa Bay, and then a study and management plan to understand diamondback terrapin and how we can help conserve them throughout the watershed. Of these projects, the estuary program would manage 4 of them, and our partners, Restore America's Estuaries, would manage 3 of those projects. Additionally, because we received so many good proposals and we didn't have as much funding to offer this year as we have in years past, we are actively seeking additional funding sources so that we might be able to fund further down in those project applications. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the proposals or the review process.
Other questions?
Second.
a motion from Smith, second from Mike. Everyone agreed on this previously. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, before we move into the executive director staff reports, may I just back up one time second? We did move to approve approved item 8, but I don't see any new information items to do with the agenda. So before we get into the rest of the agenda, are we as an organization going to take any further action based on the conversation we had here today to explore, to create a task force, something to look into the collective position that we may take other than just a peripheral $50,000 marketing funding to begin talking about transactional gapping at the point of transaction, opportunity to gather a fund or cite some kind of responsibility share that may be very impactful for the final solution.
So we have a stakeholder committee that's talking about some of these issues that's ongoing. It needs to be expanded, but I just want to make sure you understand that we do have a stakeholder committee, and that $50,000 is added to $150,000. This is a $200,000 marketing campaign. I'm not sure.
I really want to, I don't want the conversation to die. I think it's incredibly important, and I know we have obstacles, but I think that it's really worth our future to really take this on and at least explore and have a cohesive opinion as an organization that is watchful of this issue. Wherever that conversation needs to lie, I think that we should make a point for this meeting minutes that we made a decision. Is that fair enough? Or are we too far off the agenda?
Well, no, I think what Maya suggested is bringing back the focus research that was conducted so that you guys know how we've interacted with some of the stakeholders, and if there's suggestions to move forward with additional workshopping on particular items that came out of that initial research we got.
I think however you feel best about moving the issue and discussion forward, I'm in support.
Yeah, we could bring that back to the August meeting with a more comprehensive update of what the research entailed and then how the marketing messaging campaign was developed in that research. And then from there, additional workshops to hone in on some of the key findings from that are necessary with additional workshops or local group meetings. I think we could look for ways to support that.
I think that's outstanding. Thank you.
Are the realtors part of your stakeholder group?
They're part of the marketing research. They're one local group, as well as plumbers.
Both sides of the page, the realtors?
Yes, that was one of the interesting findings, obviously, that, the buyer's agents have different positions than themselves. But the stakeholder working group we have is primarily utility outreach professionals. So that was the folks that are typically our partners. So if we need to expand the makeup of that group to involve private sector representation, I think that's kind of what I'm hearing. So I'm happy to bring that, to bring that recommendation forward. If it makes sense. Once you guys, we're asking for more resources to implement the campaign. We haven't been able to really give you the details about it. So
Certainly, we could have on our next agenda a spot for, you were going to bring back those education materials anyway. Maybe we also have that staff, the working group report as well. The challenge obviously is that we don't meet every month or on a super regular basis to have that kind of timely discussion. Certainly, next meeting is a good time since we're going to have all the education materials. And quite frankly, and that's, our board members have changed since I've been on very frequently. But that is kind of a decision point every time we get into an issue that gets into we've always been the arbiter of good science and try to stay away from the policy recommendations and not policy recommendations, but anything that gets into a political conversation, just because we wanted to always be above the thing. Now, we have, it's been years before I got in here with the nitrogen and the fertilizers and those kind of things. So it's not unprecedented, but it is something that we wade into very cautiously and carefully because we've always wanted to maintain the scientific integrity of this organization. So we want to reach consensus
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Could I ask that maybe for that August meeting, I don't know how much people have on it, but if some of the material is provided with the impacts of the environmental impacts of levels and issues, so what is it? And how serious is it in our area? As well as what other, if there are other states that are moving more proactively, whether we just have a little bit of what the possibilities are out there.
And also, let's be cognizant of our staff time and
Yeah.
what the ability they have to do some of this stuff. And again, if at the end of the day, if the national report said, hey, it's our recommendation that everyone have a clean lateral, well, I think we could probably find consensus on that. How we get there might be where we have some of the issues. For example, we all, again, long before I got here, it was, we need to reduce the non-nitrogen in the bag. And so the estuary report didn't necessarily go into every detail of how to get there. There's a difference in how you impact policy, in my humble opinion. So, all right, so we ready for Mr. Raines, or
He's on the line. We can go to that.
whatever you want to do? We're up to item number 10, executive director staff reports. I just wasn't sure where we were timeline with our guests that are coming in.
Yeah, Mark, are you online and able to speak to the Pine Point issue? I'll give a brief presentation to start, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and then just cue me up when you're ready.
Well, this is sort of a timely discussion, so I highlight this slide, based on the long-term work of trying to manage nitrogen loads to Tampa Bay, and bring this point to bear on Pine Point issues that we've developed basically allocations for every permitted source and entity within the region. I highlight the Pine Point facility there at in the table to the left to indicate Pine Point received an allocation of about 0.9 tons per year to fully close out the site. In fact, our reasonable short plan for Tampa. Part of that successful story of improving nitrogen loads to the bay point where water quality is improved to support seagrasses, the long-term success story that we've been trying to highlight for our region, because it is an international success story, and we're very proud of it. So when the events of Piney Point occurred in the March, there was a huge response in terms of the community of environmental managers, practitioners throughout the region. They're concerned over that remaining load that is still present on site. So about March 25th, the site operator started noticing some additional discharges to one of their outfalls with Piney Point Creek. Over the weekend, it precipitated into an emergency event with the threat of catastrophic breach of the retaining wall at that facility. And I'm sure all have been briefed on this many times over of what happened after that point. I lived it. So, at the time of that incident, there was about 480 million gallons of mixture of processed and seawater found at the site. And to allay that emergency threat of the catastrophic breach of the retaining wall, about 215 million gallons of that water was discharged directly into Tampa Bay. That was probably over about a 10-day period from about March 30th to April 9th. And the concern with that release of water in the bay was the amount of nitrogen that was contained in remaining processed seawater. So that 215 million gallons equated to about 205 tons of nitrogen being discharged directly to the bay. That portion of Tampa Bay receives about that much nitrogen over an entire year from all sources. So again, from the point of all the progress that was made in Tampa Bay in terms of cleaning up the water quality to support seagrass, that was a primary concern, because we know more nutrients into the bay results in algal blooms generally, which shade out seagrasses and have investigating ecological effects. From that standpoint, that's where mastery program to understand what those initial discharges might be to the bay's ecology. We relied a lot, what we relied on a lot is information from the University of South Florida to understand where those initial discharges might impact the bay's resources. And I'm showing on the right an animation of actually this week of that initial discharge. So this is still sort of the lingering effects of the discharge that remain in the bay even after they've ceased from that point. The colors are a little bit misleading in terms of what the expected concentrations of any sort of pollutants might be in that initial discharge. So the teal to green, the medium shading scale. The teal to green are basically a 1,000 to 10,000 fold reduction in initial concentration of a potential pollutant that was contained in the discharge. As I mentioned, the primary pollutant of concern was nitrogen in the form of ammonium. So we had concentrations of well above 200 milligrams per liter. A 1,000-fold to 10,000-fold decrease brings those initial discharges down to about levels of background conditions, but still probably a little bit higher than what we'd expect in Tampa Bay during the dry season. So again, that lingering source of nutrients in the bay was a prime concern, especially since we started the seed indicators that our seagrass number increases are starting to show some potential impacts, especially in the upper part of our bay segment, both Tampa Bay and October. We definitely don't want this event exacerbating those current conditions or fueling other sort of potentially ecological effects that would have cascading effects, not only on the environment, but the economy. So from that standpoint, I give kudos to my staff and all the partners who have responded to this event. From the onset, it was all hands on deck. The county staff was out there probably 18, 20 hours a day, managing the site, managing the discharge, trying to delay the emergency. The monitoring staff of all the counties have been involved in response. Their staff have been working, day in, day out to supplement our understanding of what potential impacts might be in and around the Port Manatee discharge site. The state DEP has been on site since the event occurred. So from that standpoint, the DEP Manatee County response to the event, they were the primary responders, and we reacted as a region to support those efforts. Again, understand the impacts, then hopefully bring some full closure to this facility. A lot of what our staff had worked on was to assemble the relevant information to understand what baseline conditions were on the discharge event. That was in terms of water quality conditions, as well as seagrass and outdoor resources, so that if we do see a response today from increased algae, we would be able to judge how big of an impact relative to baseline conditions. Mark Speck and my crew has been instrumental in standing up basically from nothing, a dashboard to synthesize the information across all agencies that are collecting data in Tampa Bay that might be relevant to this response. My staff, Sheila and Gary, have been out bi-weekly sampling macroalgae and seagrass conditions both north and south of the site. Maya and Joe have been responding to I think upward of 50 to 60 media requests over the past month. So again, it's been all hands on deck, and to the point, Ron is basically our one taking care of our day-to-day business, because this has been all consuming. And again, I think it's just reflective of the seriousness of it, and hopefully a wake-up call for us as a community to make sure this site is fully put down. I will leave it at that and just mention to you that we are going to continue to coordinate sustained monitoring effort. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Raines, who's the Florida chief science officer who's been on site as well, and he can give you an update of where the facility in its current state is at, and what our plans for additional potential discharges moving into the summer rainy season. And again, our efforts are to continue to coordinate a monitoring effort to fully understand what the ramifications of these discharges that were initially occurred in response to the emergency and any other protracted discharges that might occur before going to the site. So I will stop there, and I'm sure there's going to probably be some other questions, but I also want to give some time to Dr. Mark Ring, who's joined us today to speak on the state. Mark,
All right.
to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. And as always, thanks for coordinating all of the monitoring efforts in the Bay. That's been an invaluable help as we've all tried to figure out how to figure out what happened and sort of in real time and where this is all going to end up. I'll just give you sort of a quick sort of sketch of the state's involvement up to today and where we think we might go in the future. The state authorized the initial emergency discharges by our HRK for human health and safety reasons. The leak was a tear in the liner of one of those ponds, what we call NGS South, and water was traveling down through the gypsum stack, through a conduit, and erupting at the bottom of the gyp stack wall. And this is sort of the way earthen dams typically fail. They fail from the bottom up, not from the top down. The high pressure in the water in the pond pushing down on the base erodes out the bottom and dam walls can collapse. That was the concern. The water was coming out. They looked like not just springs, they looked like fountains. There was water sort of burbling forth from the ground right at the base of the dam wall. And there was a significant concern not only by the state, but also by Wood Engineering, the third-party engineering company that was under contract to HRK, that the dam wall would collapse. If that happened, there'd be an uncontrolled discharge of about 480 million gallons of this water, not only into sensitive habitats, including Tampa Bay, but also into some residential areas and industrial areas. That was sort of not going to happen. Like, we really had to sort of act to eliminate that possibility. That was why the state authorized HRK to make those discharges. And as they were doing that, there was two things ongoing. One is we were monitoring the leakage at the base, and we were watching it diminish and diminish down. At the same time, the state contracted Garner, which is normally a well field services company, but they're under contract for emergency services in Florida. They came in with a big team. We also contracted with the dive company, Divecom, I think. I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now. And they began working together alongside the HRK, Wood, and state engineers to start repairing the leak. And there was sort of a long sequence of events. Eventually, we, underneath the tear in the liner, there was a big cavern. So we backfilled that with some gravel that slowed the leak all by itself. Then we manufactured and placed a giant metal plate across that. There was some sediment on top of the liner, so it didn't make full contacts. And then we also built a large geotextile that had low permeability, and we laid that blanket across and pinned it down. And we're currently now building, we first built a cofferdam out of sand, and now we're filling it all in. So there'll be sort of a layer of sand, a geotextile, the steel plate, and then the gravel. And the leakage has slowed down to sort of background leakage. Like, these things always leak a little bit, which is why the perimeter, I don't know if you saw in that oblique aerial photograph, you may have seen water sort of linearly along the perimeter in the foreground. They always have a little bit of leakage. That water's collected in those ditches, routed to stormwater ponds on site, and then pumped back to the top if and when those stormwater ponds get too full. So since April 9th, there's been no discharge from the site. The site water balance is stable, allowing us to start looking forward instead of looking backwards. How do we stop this? Instead, looking forward, where do we take it from here? So there's a lot of things that are currently ongoing and other things that are sort of still in discussion and planning stages. We currently have 2 innovative technology companies, one N-Clear, that's capital N Clear, one word. They're based in Atlanta, Georgia, and another company, Phosphorus Free Water, based in Lakeland. They're poised in 2 different areas on the site, and they're using basically the same technology to treat the water to reduce the phosphorus and nitrogen concentrations. Just give you a quick primer on how that works. It's just mostly pH management with a couple of other steps. They put water into a pond and they raise the pH upwards towards 9, 9.5, close to 10. They do that by adding sodium hydroxide. That naturally causes phosphorus to precipitate out as calcium phosphate or magnesium phosphate, which, by the way, is the original mineable material. That settles out in the bottoms of the ponds and remains there. They then take the water out. That gets the phosphorus from about 160 milligrams per liter down to 1 milligram per liter. Then they take that water and they put it into a series of tanks and they hit it with bleach, which is sodium hypochlorite, which is super aggressively trying to look for hydrogen to make water. And so most of the nitrogen here, it's like 230 milligrams per liter total nitrogen. It's 220 milligrams per liter of ammonia nitrogen. So got that hydrogen. So the sodium hypochlorite scavenges that hydrogen and it makes nitrogen gas, N2 gas, which goes up into the atmosphere, is totally inert. It's 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. So it just goes up and disappears. That's better than some other techniques that could have been used that make ammonia gas, which is both deadly if you inhale it in too large a quantity, but also rains right back out. That's not what they're making. They're making the nitrogen gas again, which is safe, inert, and isn't going to rain back out into the bay. And then when that water, and by the way, that gets it, their contract states they have to get it down to 7 milligrams per liter. The last data I got was they're at 3.5 milligrams per liter is what they're sort of consistently hitting right now. And then the last thing they do is manage the pH. They either have to raise or lower the pH to try to get it into the range of 7 to 9. The bay is about 8 right now. So they have not discharged any of that water yet. It's all circulating on site, because we wanted to make sure that, like, you can do this in a bench top really easily. Like if you put it like in little buckets on your bench top, it's a pretty easy technique. Doing it at scale in real time is hard. So we had both companies working on it for many weeks, circulating on site and showing us that they can do it consistently without messing things up. They've had some setbacks. They've fixed those setbacks. So I think we figured out most of the things that could go wrong. And they're performing pretty consistently. So yesterday, DEP, EPA, Manatee County, and Hillsborough EPC all got samples from each of the innovative tech companies, both what they're bringing into their system and what's coming out. We'd expect results back from that in the next couple of days, and those can start sort of the official results. I mean, DEP's been doing this for a long time. This is sort of more sort of leveling up that we want to sort of get everybody on board that these innovative tech companies are capable of doing what they're setting out to do. We've been sort of rushing along because, as you guys know, the wet season's coming. There's already a depression or a disturbance anyway near the Bahamas. At least there was as of a day or two ago, the last I checked. And we're about to get hit then with some water. About 30 million gallons a month falls on that site. And having just discharged, HRK having just discharged 215 million gallons, we're not particularly keen on accumulating some more, particularly in as much as the patch we've put into the pond may or may not hold. I mean, we're still trying to sort out how well that patch is working and if there are other possible leaks in the stack. As we think about what we're going to do long term, and I will come back to that in a moment, in the near term, we may decide that it is wise for HRK to begin sort of moderate level discharges of treated water only, so that we don't accumulate more water, we don't add more pressure, we don't find our patch didn't work or there's another failure, and we go back to sort of discharges of untreated water. Right now, I think they're treating at about a kind of little more than 1,000 gallons a minute. And so that's about the capacity. Each company says they can go up to 5,000 gallons a minute for a total 10,000 gallons a minute. I don't foresee us even needing to do that. We're talking about possibly discharging very low quantities of water. Again, the permit's written at 7 milligrams per liter total nitrogen and 1 milligram per liter total phosphorus, and sort of bleeding off some water in advance of the wet season, and then holding it and waiting sort of as the rain comes to continuing to bleed out a little bit of that treated storm water to try to maintain site water balance. Basically just trying to tread water. Long term then, the governor and the secretary have both been quite adamant, like this is it. Like there was the 2001 incident, the 2011 incident, now there's a 2021 incident, and nobody wants to be sitting at this table in 2031. We all inherited it, we ought to fix it for good. So the state is adamant about moving forward on a full closure plan. There's a lot of water up there that still needs to be addressed. And so there's discussions about putting RO in. That's great, but also, as you well know, there's a concentrate that's left behind. We'd still have to deal with that. So that's not a full solution. There's discussions about an injection well. That takes 18 to 24 months to get it permitted and drilled and functioning. There's discussions about filling tankers and hauling water way out into the Gulf and discharging it out there. And there's talks even about rail cars, though there's no destination yet picked out, so I'm not sure what good that does. And so those conversations are ongoing. In fact, today I'm joining you instead of the secretary who's down in at the site with Dr. Hopes from Manatee County to sort of discuss that longer term vision, about where we want to go with it. But I do think that there's very little discussion anymore about whether or not we should move to closure, and the state has committed to going to closure and then seeking to recompense their expenses from HRK at a later date rather than waiting for HRK to do it themselves. I think I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions you have. Yeah, I've no better place to be than here. So if you got any questions, fire.
First, Dr. Raines, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time this morning. It's a critical issue for us all, and we do appreciate you having me here. We do have some questions. Commissioner Van Ossenbridge from Manatee County.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the information. Obviously, I lived this when it was happening, so I'm pretty familiar. My name is Ariel, who were at my point on Monday. I have a few questions for you. Let's start with the CIP well. Secretary Valentine expressed to us that the permitting process would take place at sort of hyperspeed, and the county has approved the CIP well on the site. We have allocated $9 million. We have found a contractor to drill it, and we provided, because the well was at 1.5 in 2017. Permitting process started with the CIP well, but the commission at that time, due to local political pressure, reversed the decision and decided not to pursue that. But the point is that from sort of paperwork, engineering standpoint, we have 4 samples, that sort of thing. Commissioner Valentine assured us that the permitting process would take place at hyperspeed as opposed to the 18 to 24 month process. Do you have any additional information about that and the speed at which the permitting process will take place?
Yeah, so one of the things we are currently exploring is, it's a shorter time period to permit a monitoring well, but you could quickly convert a monitoring well to UIC well. So that we're thinking about things like that. Could we actually start even drilling, for example, on the assumption that we're going to ultimately permit a UIC well? So I know that we're thinking about sort of creative ways to shave that, because actually, we initially went into this thinking 18 to 24 months was the timeline, and we got quoted something else like 36 months recently, and we all just sort of like, that can't be a thing, you know. So I don't have any more information than that. I don't know where you could shave time from the permitting process, but I do want to assure you, and I probably should have said this in my lead up, it's absolutely the Secretary's top priority. He's on site today. He's been on site pretty routinely. I can attest the fact that we have a meeting at 4 o'clock every single day, including weekends, and the Secretary is deeply involved. So that, you know, the extent to which it can be sped up, it's going to be sped up. You know, even using whatever tricks we can. I do know that there's some opposition to that, and you know, just like there's going to be opposition to almost any solution we concoct. If we hauled it offshore and dumped it, I'm sure there would be a lot of opposition to that too. And if we just treat it and discharge it to the bay, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in this room, in this conversation here, that have a lot of opposition to that too. So I think there'll be possibly delays associated with just sort of getting stakeholders rallied around a particular outcome. And so I'm hopeful that you guys in Manatee County can help us come to some consensus about what we ought to do. And we'll certainly be looking to you for help for that.
Well, I can tell you that our board voted 6-1 for the well.
Yeah.
We seem to have pretty solid consensus from our board.
Good.
Probably the best way to go.
Well, and it can be done on site, right? I mean, that's the nice thing. I mean, that you know, we don't have to move it very far if we drill a UIC well nearby.
Right. Actually,
everything else requires moving it to some distance away before we do something. This is the one way HRK could handle it on their own property and solve the problem in perpetuity.
Okay, I have a few other questions here. First of all, I want to say that, you know, I didn't want to start being critical by any means, but the state has been fantastic. Dr. Gross and I are close friends, and we actually were together Friday at 5:30 when HRK called and quote told us shit's hitting the fan. And so we had to hit the panic button. And Secretary Valentine, 24 hours, was in Manatee County on site. The governor was there for 48 hours. So the state with, you know, Chinook helicopters and, you know, brought in pumps to help us with what was basically a shell game, moving circulating water around the site, doing everything we could to prevent allowing water to leave the site. But then as the structural integrity of the wall obviously deteriorated, and we realized that people's property was very dangerous. That, you know, we started pumping it into the day, 27,000 gallons. But at any rate, so we are appreciative of all the help we received from this. My question is, what is the rate of seepage at this point now?
Yeah, great question. So we actually never knew the rate of seepage because it's diffuse. But I will say this, the rate of seepage now, it varies from day to day, which is still concerning to us. Like it'll surge a little bit and diminish. And so that's still a concern to us, but the rate of seepage is certainly less than any concerns that we would ever need to discharge off-site, be forced to discharge off-site. I mean, right now, so you saw that sort of oblique aerial photograph. There's the pond that has the leak in it is the one that's in the southeast corner. We call it NGS South. Well, you can see it, I guess, on the screen right now. That's the one that leaks, exactly, and it leaks out sort of to the north and east. And you can see that perimeter ditch. And if you go to the southwest and go just a little bit further, you see a little rectangle, a little square down there. That's the, yeah, right there. That's the sump pond. So water is collected there that comes out through that ditch. That's actually where phosphorus-free water is managing theirs. They're set up on the north side of that. So that every bit of water that goes in there is able to be treated. And then they have the capacity to either recycle back into that same pond, or when that pond starts getting a little bit too high, they can pump back up onto either that northern pond or the southern pond. We're trying to use the northern pond, that one right there, because that's the one that has the evaporators in it. And by the way, great time to evaporate right now. It's the dry season, the depths of the dry season. And as you guys know as well as I do, it's been pretty windy and pretty dry. So the evaporation is going like gangbusters right now. So they're able to evaporate off the water and retain the solutes on site. So right now, that's the way it works. It leaks a little bit out of NGS South. It goes through that perimeter ditch, ends up in the LPWS pond. It's treated, it's held there. If necessary, it's pumped back into NGS North and hopefully evaporated off. So that's the way we work it right now. Nothing is leaving the site, and no amount of seepage is even threatening to leave the site right now.
Sure. Are we in NGS North water at all? Because that water obviously is a different chemistry than the other pond.
Yeah.
That was the NGS North was what we were most concerned about. We're concerned about the structural integrity of that pond because the chemistry is different and much worse situation for the bay. So are we currently treating that pond?
So no, we are not treating NGS North. That's part of the longer term problem right now. All the treatment, again, that phosphorus-free water treats out of that sump pond, which is the leakage, and just basic storm water that falls on, rainfall that falls on the site ends up routing into there too. N-Clear is taking water directly out of NGS South, which is that mixed seawater processed water. We're not touching NGS North right now. You're right. It's got higher concentrations of the nitrogen and phosphorus. It's part of the longer term solution. And so for the time being, it is not part of this problem, except in as much as there may be some of the leakage that comes out of there, though I'm unaware of any evidence to suggest that NGS North is leaking. The leak we know about, and we've surveyed quite a bit looking for other leaks. The only leak we know about is the one in NGS South.
Okay. Having been familiarized with this property prior to the disaster, I'm only looking at how many feet to freeboard at times, how many inches to freeboard we were. We've discharged 215 million gallons out of the South Pond. So, and with evaporation in the low water table, I'm sure NGS North is in pretty good shape as we head into rainy season. But what is the risk level of NGS South? How much water do you feel comfortable taking on for frame of reference? 1 inch of water at NGS South equates to about 1.5 million gallons. How much water would the state feel comfortable taking on in the South?
It's a great question, and it's like many great questions. We don't really have an answer. We do, as I said, see the leakage coming out some days and not other days, and some days it surges a little bit and goes back down, and sometimes we can figure out exactly what's happening. Like when we were putting the gravel into that cavern, it surged, then it slowed down because we think some mud from the bottom of the pond got down in there, and then when that mud raveled out, we think it surged. I mean, we're always trying to figure out what's happening. So we know that it's not plugged. Like it's not like we didn't put the cork in it and we're fine filling it all the way back up with water and making that part of the permanent solution. So we know that right now at this level, current level, it's leakage that we can manage on site. What worries us is finding out all of a sudden that we've reached a point where we can't handle it on site. And the all of a sudden might be because we get hit with a tropical depression or hurricane that drops 24 inches in 36 hours, and suddenly it's filled with water and that leakage is uncontrolled, and we're terrified again, and we start having to pump directly out of the pond in order to maintain safety. So we don't have a number. We just know that right now we can manage the leakage on site, which is why the proposal that we're considering right now is, well, what if we just tread water by leaking this out at a small rate? By the way, if we leaked it out by my calculations at 200 gallons per minute, now at the maximum during the problems back between March 30 and April 9, I think the maximum was 22,000 gallons a minute. Right. If we discharged at 200 gallons a minute and got a normal summer, there would be no accumulation of water. So we're talking about far, far, far less, orders of magnitude less discharge just to tread water. So the idea now is maybe we discharge a little bit extra, a little bit more than that to sort of bring it down in advance, and then discharge even, small amounts and sort of spread it out. We can turn it on and off. If there's rain coming in and the bay stages up, that's going to shove water out, and maybe we could turn on the pumps and pump a little water out at that point in time, and then during a dry period, turn them back down. And so the idea right now is just to sort of think about, how the bay fills with water and drains with water, and turn the pumps on and off at small amounts just to tread water. But for me to answer your specific question, it's probably beyond any of us right now. Again, we just know we can handle what we have right now. So the idea is perhaps we ought to keep it at this level and not accumulate more water. I wish I could answer that question better, sir, but that's the best I've got.
That's great. I appreciate it. I appreciate the board allowing me to answer my question. Just to give you a frame of reference, it leaked prior to this with a seep at about 40 gallons a minute. The county was contacted when it reached about 200 gallons a minute. We didn't get but the state about 2,500 gallons a minute, but within 36 hours when they hit the fan, we were at 15,000 gallons a minute. Sorry about the truck. Anyway, thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Sure thing.
We have other questions for Dr. Rain?
Sorry.
That's all right. We really appreciate your time this morning, Dr. Rain. I'm sorry.
Not a question, just an amazing presentation. You flew us over and into the issues and clear to understand and daunting, certainly in this bad day. But nice presentation, thank you.
Anything else?
I just want to add that, I think Dr. Rain started the day that this became an emergency, just like Dr. Oates became, I think, the administrator when this emergency started unfolding. He's been nothing but communicative with me in our response in terms of coordinating, monitoring, working with the state. So I do really appreciate Dr. Rain's very, very forthcoming and communicative way how the state is handling the situation. So we appreciate that. Just want to express that and make that known. And appreciate you for taking the time this morning to address all the questions.
Sure thing, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Just so everybody knows, I'm actually teaching a field course right now with a bunch of students. So I'm gonna jump off now. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. You guys can hit my phone or send me an email. Ed can explain how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk offline at any time. So just let me know if you need more information. Happy to provide it. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Sherwood, I know I threw us a little bit up our calendar, but what do you got next?
Yeah, just to add that, the conversation, I do have some questions up there. So I heard there's still a lot of unknowns, especially as we head into the rainy season. So the concern is still real that there's potential forthcoming impacts. So again, our response is trying to coordinate monitoring in and around the Fort Manatee discharge sites that we fully understand what these interim and longer-term impacts might be. If this becomes a broader conversation, because this is not the only facility in the watershed, I know there's been other conversations about full and final closure for some of these facilities. So that's an ongoing dialogue that I know the region started to discuss. Certainly welcome this as one of the discussion, much like we are addressing sanitary sewer overflow, private lateral issues. These are ongoing threats in terms of water quality, as long as we manage them correctly. So that's the name of the game.
On the management topic, so we understand a little more about this capacity. And here is putting a lot of that filtered water, the filtered water is going to set our line on almost 35 million gallons. So eventually, when it does start to discharge, that water will clear out additional space on the site. Plus, if we got into a situation where we could open that pond up and drain it, it's a shell game on property, right? Trying to keep contaminated water on site, so we could clear as it drains into that small holding pond at the bottom, you pump it back up to the top, it's a cycle, right? We could pump 16,000 gallons. So we're in a much better situation where before we can pump 2,000 gallons. I let you read this.
So, we're just bringing it all together and where you left up for the presentation. Look at the village that's come together, the emergency and the, I don't know how many, are we at 100 million yet?
Yeah, we have 100, what counts right about $100 million.
Okay. The enormity of this, after 20 years of knowing it existed, put it off, but the sense of urgency, the amount of resources, I know Swift Mud is heavy into this as well, contributing from our perspective, support for the issue, manpower, equipment, et cetera. Going back to the lateral, and you said it, it's time to manage these issues when we identify them and not hold on thinking the time is in our favor. It is not. And I just want this to be the last, burning fire that we have in an environmental capacity. Let's try to get ahead of it. Let's try to do better. Let's try to bring the stakeholders to understand that. Look at the tax dollars that are cycling through the state, coming from the state coffers back into this issue, where, again, to the lateral issue, if we are allowing the transaction of real estate to create a fund that offsets and displaces kind of a problem in the future, a greater impact in the future, why are we not going to move ahead and try to get the conversation with more robust timeline and expectation performance back on the table? I think that this is just, unfortunately, a wonderful example of what we're going in the future. I think that this organization, through our county, cities, with DEP, I know you guys are doing all that you can with your arms wrapped around all that you have. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen from this core in our community. So please, let's try to bring a sense of urgency to the issue across the board, this and all things. And again, thanks for letting me kind of take just a minute, but it's very important. And if I represent Swift Mud, 90% I represent just being a citizen of the community. I lived in the state for my entire life. I have an office and a home down in Manatee County. It's real. It's not something that's happening across the pond. It's right in our community. So please let's try to not forget that.
Yeah, we do have another guest presentation by Dr. Jennifer Schaefer. This is agenda item 11, so I don't want to take up too much of her time. You want to move to that? Absolutely. We're having internet issues right now. She might not be hearing us either, but we may not have. Jennifer, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Let me try to hand you control. We're having internet issues right now. So we wanted to give the opportunity to highlight a previously funded Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund project. Dr. Jennifer Schaefer, she's with the Science and Environmental Council of Southwest Florida. They received a T-BIRD grant back in 2017, I believe, to look at, 2019, to look at the impacts from the 2017 through 2019 red tide event. Much of the work that we talked about was both the environmental and economic impacts that resulted from that prolonged red tide event and kind of lessons learned from each municipality responding to it. So, moving forward, how do we best respond to these events in the future to provide an overview of what we learned from that 2018 event. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ed. And thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. You can hear me and see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, speaking of staying ahead of issues, as we know, these sorts of environmental disaster events don't stop at the county line. So we were interested in studying one of our last sort of big environmental disasters, if you will, the 2018 red tide. And our red tide impact study sought to examine conditions in the 5-county Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay region. This includes Pasco, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Manatee, and Sarasota counties before, during, and after the 2018 red tide event. And we looked at 18 measures of community well-being, waters and beaches and wildlife and recreation and economy, et cetera. I'll show you some of those results in a moment. Importantly, though, we also documented the red tide emergency response of the 5 counties. And then taking what we learned, we drafted a red tide operations plan and some recommendations. So like hurricanes, extreme red tide events are a hazard that we hope won't return anytime soon, but we want to be ready for the next one. So let's recall the massive 2018 red tide event. The severity, the extent, the duration was unprecedented in recent years, and it indeed received national media attention. 120 miles of coastline along Southwest Florida was impacted for 16 months from 2017 to 2019. Here in this sort of red tide calendar, if you will, we can see that while severe red tide conditions developed in Charlotte Harbor as early as November of 2017, but here in the Tampa Bay area, as shown in the calendar, consistently high levels of red tide cells, over 10,000 cells per liter, shown in the light orange. That's the level at which fish begin to be affected and humans become sensitive to the brevetoxins. So that occurred in August of 2018. Concentrations rose to more than 1,000 times lethal levels, order of magnitude higher than what's considered high on FWC's scale. And levels stayed there for weeks on end. The result was devastating. So in the Tampa Bay area, manatee, dolphin, turtle strandings were up 300%. Bird hospital admissions also up 300%. Unfortunately, most never did make it to the hospital. Calls to FWC's fish kill hotline were up 400% for the year. And in Tampa Bay waters, all the way from Pasco to Manatee, 2,178 tons of dead marine life were removed. Tampa Bay coastal tourism, Manatee County barrier island restaurants took a big hit. They lost 27% of their gross revenue for the year. Visitor lodging countywide was down 18% for Manatee County. Lodging was down for Pinellas and Hillsborough as well, but not quite to that degree. And it seems boaters opted not to go out, as evidenced in a 24% drop in marine fuel sales. Looking at the impacts on the community at large, 211 calls for social services in Manatee County actually reached a 3-year high in October of 2018, higher than during Hurricane Irma the year prior, especially for food, utilities, and housing. We also looked at community sentiment and concerns through a really cool study conducted by Dr. Andrew Skripnikov of New College Data Science Program. We analyzed 17,000 tweets off of a Twitter fire hose, and were able to look at the text and the content and the sentiment in them, found high correlations between tweets and actual conditions on the ground at multiple spatial and temporal scales. Most of the content was expressed a concern or interest in the environment, 22% health, and 9% about the economy. But we also wanted to find out what was happening on the front lines of the red tide response. We interviewed emergency response managers and natural resource managers from each of the 5 counties of the Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay region. And we also gleaned information from county documents and from media reports. And with that regional perspective, we were able to identify notable actions and innovations that were going on, see where there were maybe some gaps and some challenges in the red tide response, and provide some recommendations for preparing and responding for future red tides. We use this information and honestly, most of it was really innovated by Pinellas County. We use that to generate red tide response operations plans for each of the 5 counties, incorporating detailed steps for monitoring and reporting, for cleanup, communications, and records management. So I just want to present quickly some of the highlights, looking at some of the gaps and challenges in the red tide response and some of our recommendations for possible approaches. So first, related to the declaration of emergency. The governor's declaration of emergency came on August 13th, weeks after impacts had started. And the declaration was actually the trigger that the counties needed to activate their private contractors for debris cleanup, because it ensured availability of FDEP's grant funds. And there's broad agreement that an earlier declaration of emergency could have resulted in a more robust, effective, and coordinated response. As far as regional cooperation, other than sharing situation reports and weekly update calls, counties didn't really have a formal process for coordinating response efforts between neighboring counties. Really, they just relied on their professional relationships, the strong network that's created through the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Regional Planning Council. But since red tide impacts moved northward up the coast and were spatially patchy, even in the areas being affected, not all the counties were responding to the same intensity at the same time. So there was unused capacity in some places and overly taxed in others. And then finally, with regard to emergency management planning, none of the 5 counties in the Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay region had a red tide emergency response plan. It's not really considered in hazard mitigation planning. And there was little institutional memory from the last major red tide event in 2005 and 2006. So as a consequence, staff were tasked with creating and adapting procedures in real time, on the fly. And it was pretty impressive, the innovations that they came up with and their overall very responsive programs. So our recommendations are simply perhaps develop a process with DEP for determining what conditions warrant a red tide emergency declaration so that it can be activated earlier for a more robust response. Perhaps developing a process or an MOU for cooperation between neighboring counties for mobilizing Gulf and Bay surveillance and equipment and subcontractors in shared water bodies. And finally, to develop and adopt countywide red tide response plans. Another aspect was the conditions assessment. Counties developed their own procedures for daily assessment of conditions, offshore and inshore and onshore, such as estimating debris volume, water color, respiratory irritation, and odors. But standardizing these subjective qualitative measurements among different observers was challenging, as you can imagine. Not everyone smells the same way. And it wasn't consistent across counties, so not really comparable. With regard to reporting tools, we found that because of the complexity of the operations going on, there were different streams of data being reported to different managers in different formats, even within the same county operation. And overall, most counties seem to lack a centralized, open data reporting management and visualization tool to handle the whole operation. So our recommendations are to develop a regionally standardized procedure and training, an SOP, if you will, for open water and shoreline surveillance and assessment, especially for those qualitative indicators, and to develop a centralized open data management and visualization tools with some kind of training guide, because in the midst of the crisis, the reporting tools should be really simple to use, fast for staff, not to take up their time, but so that they can use them consistently. And data summaries and visualizations should be readily accessible to leadership so they can keep a tab on what's happening. And finally, the cleanup operations. Perhaps the single most important aspect of the red tide response, we think, is to prioritize the cleanup of floating debris, tracking those debris masses and removing them before they impact shorelines or sink to the bottom. And obviously, besides the impacts to beaches and sensitive coastal marsh, dead fish that are left to decay in the water may contribute to a longer red tide bloom. They may contribute to more severe waterfowling that could be responsible for seagrass die-offs. And of course, all that extra nutrient loading in the bay should be avoided. And in fact, this was Pinellas County's strategy. And you can see in these graphs that show the tons of debris removed and actually reimbursements from FDEP grants that that strategy paid off. Using a variety of vessels and manpower of local fishermen and charter captains, as well as the debris contractor, 1,862 tons of red tide debris were cleaned from Pinellas County waters and beaches. Some counties, though, couldn't get the equipment and staff needed for the magnitude of the cleanup required to be responsive on beaches and in canals and in bays. They needed flat-bottomed skiffs and outrigger vessels, trash skimmers, beach rakes, a whole array of different types of equipment. So the bottom line, we think it's all about targeting the floating debris, but this is a pretty challenging thing to do. Red tide and dead marine life don't stop at the county line, but cooperation across county lines could make the response more effective. Regional cooperation for sharing data, surveillance, equipment, and maybe contractors. Cooperation then leads to more capacity means more cleanup means a healthier bay and a happier public. We're really pleased to say that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, under the Agency for Bay Management, under the direction of Alana Todd, has taken up our recommendations and will take the lead to organize and facilitate cooperation between counties. In fact, we've got a regional workshop scheduled coming up next Tuesday, the 25th, and all 5 counties are participating along with the state and regional agencies that are involved in the red tide response. So lots of people contributed to this study. We want to thank all the scientists who shared their data, all the resource managers and emergency managers who shared their time and knowledge that we were able to use to help kind of organize all this information regionally. And obviously thanks to Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the TBERF Fund, as well as the Sunrise Rotary Club Foundation. We had donations from the Sarasota region that made inclusion of the whole region possible. You can download the red tide impact and response summary at this URL. And in addition to the impact report and the response report, the infographics that I presented earlier are available also for download and sharing. So I'm available for discussion and questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Do we have questions for Dr. Schaefer? Councilmember.
That was a phenomenal presentation, so I'm looking forward to downloading it. When you had the last slide that said bottom line, I was wondering if there were a slide that would follow that would articulate, you know, human actions that contribute to red tide. I mean, is that appropriate to discuss? I mean, to include, or I mean, what are things we can be doing to reduce the intensity or occurrence of red tide?
Sure, yeah. The entire Tampa Bay Estuary Program is oriented around reducing nutrient pollution and conserving coastal wetlands, which both can reduce the intensity and duration of red tides. This particular study was focused on response, but clearly, to your point, we'd rather not contribute to severe red tides in the first place. So there's a whole slew of best practices for reducing anthropogenic land-based nutrient runoff into the bay, which can possibly feed red tide once it's inshore.
Anything else? Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer. We appreciate your time and presentation this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. I'm going to take that control and just highlight as part of the Pine Point response, we have started seeing red tide observations from Tampa Bay in April. The latest results from this week, actually May 18th, was the last sampling date by FWC, have shown that it's still at low to very low levels, so it's not intensifying, but there's now observations just offshore of Fort Madison. It's moved further up in the bay, and this could be a real concern for us as we move into the wet season. As we're trying to manage nutrient flows to the bay proper for short circuit these sort of events. Just want to mention that to you all. And again, we'll report on conditions as we get the data from all monitoring agencies that are out there responding. I think we're all over the agenda, but I think we're back to the executive director report. Yes, sir. Thanks, Sharon. A couple items I just want to mention, just want to highlight and give you a brief update on the status of the 2021 interlocal agreement update. There were a couple of partners that had scheduled on their board meetings approval of the previously interlocal agreement update in April, but when the Pine Point happened, a lot of those discussions were postponed. So I know several of our partners now have this on their agenda items for the June and later meeting in the summer. Just to briefly highlight that since approval at the February meeting, there were two comments that we received from Manatee County as well as FDEP. These changes were incorporated into an updated version that is contained in the board packet. Done review those changes. They're on pages 2, 8, and 11 of the linked document. His analysis was that these were mainly scrivener corrections and didn't require additional board action at this time. So the linked version that's in the packet today is what I'm distributing to all your staff to schedule for your upcoming either council or commission meetings to fully get your boards to approve that update. Again, once it's updated by each of the individual partners as identified in the interlocal agreement, we would file all those signatory pages for counties represented in the estuary program, which time it would be fully executed. Be in effect hopefully before the start of our fiscal year 2022 October. So that's the target deadline that we're hoping that you all pursue in terms of board approvals so that we have enough time to get the signature and fully file. Be happy to answer any questions or pull up the document if you want me to show which updates we received in the interim period. Two other items that I want to briefly mention. We have been contacted by the city of Largo as well as a third party who have been in litigation. We are identified in a settlement agreement to receive funding based on prior sanitary sewer overflows that occurred in the city of Largo. In the settlement agreement, we're identified to receive $100,000 to support a project within the Tampa Bay segment, particularly in the city of Largo, either reduce nutrient loads or create habitat restoration opportunities in that water center. I provided a letter that we've used typically to respond to these settlement agreements in the past. There was one for the city of St. Petersburg as well as Gulfport, where we identified we received some funding based on similar settlement agreements. So what we are intending to use, again, once we fully communicate with the Department of Justice that we're aware of the settlement agreement and would use that money for environmentally beneficial project in Tampa Bay, we're intending to potentially pursue is an enhancement of a Pinellas County project focused on Channel 5, which is looking to use, create a tidal connection with that channel with the whole Tampa Bay system. Project that we developed conceptual plans for a number of years ago. The lack of funding to fully implement, the county is pursuing that with additional water management district cooperative agreement funding. And this money would be used to further enhance the habitat restoration associated with the mooring of that weir. So that's what our preliminary concept is, to use these resources, and I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention that we were identified in the settlement. And if anyone had any questions with that, both the letter response to the Department of Justice is contained in the board packet.
This is the best way to be involved in a lawsuit.
Right.
This is a feather sound into the old thing.
Yeah, and City of Largo does provide reclaimed water to the golf course, which is adjacent to this channel, so it is in the vicinity of there. So that's why we have this department the project pursuit. The last thing I wanted to bring to the board's attention is that we've also been contacted by Ducks Unlimited, to their corporate partner, the Mosaic Company. They were wanting to support an already funded restoration project. It's called Tracker Island Restoration. It has been funded through a prior TBER before. It's the Water Management District project. It's looking at old fish farm ponds in the Hillsborough Bay region, kitchen area of Hillsborough Bay, to restore some of the wetland habitats to permanent fish farm. If the board is inclined to accept this money, what would happen on our end is that would free up the already obligated Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, designated funds, to support additional proposals that we received this year. So we've come back to this board in August and provide to you recommendations for funding additional projects if we were to receive that money to support that already funded project. So again, there was some conversation at the management board in terms of acceptance of those funds and maybe keeping the estuary program staying clear and impartial to any donations like this at this time. But from the point of view from my point of view, again, we would be able to support additional project proposals that we received. We had almost $2 million our worthy of funding, and we're only able to support half of those projects. So again, if we were to accept this funds, that would help us support additional restoration projects. So I'm leaving that up to the board to have that conversation, and just want to express that this was an extended conversation by the management board in terms of executive money of the board on this project. I'll be happy to stop there to explain further or provide additional discussion, but if there are no, we can reach back out to that. There was no objection from our boards for moving forward.
So today is a decision day. We want to. That's it.
I think it's fully warranted that we continue conversation, and a contribution that helps the environment is a contribution that helps the environment. And if it can in turn release some of our obligated funds to fund other projects, why would we?
Pretty much because this is not an action item. If there was not consensus by the board to accept that money, I would make it clear that it was not. Sure.
Yeah.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion in a second. Is there further conversation? We'll say it's still on our choice, correct?
Correct. And there are further on that.
Further conversation? If not, so we have a motion in a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Show of passing unanimously. You have consensus.
Only a couple of staff updates to highlight. Joe, if you could really briefly go over some of the communication updates from this past quarter. like to very quickly, looking at the reporting window of March 29th, April 9th, right when Penny Point was really coming to a head, especially in the media, we started taking a look back at some of the metrics that we had collected across our social media channels, general communication channels. I'd like to really quickly give you a brief overview of that. In that reporting window, March 29th to April 9th, we had responded to 43 media requests. Staff coordinated and completed 30 of those requests, and we forwarded 8 to our partners in an effort to give them some shine as well. So, Ed had mentioned a little bit before that Maya and I have spent a lot of time coordinating these requests, but really it was the entire team effort in responding to that. Putting together a really quick spreadsheet to track requests from regional publications, local publications like Tampa, the Sun, Tampa Bay Times, Great Herald, but also non-regional like National Geographic. So that was a really great feat. We were happy to see that much attention come in. And then of course, just across social media, we had a lot of great numbers in that reporting window. We saw quite a bit of a jump across all of our channels. I won't go too deep into those numbers, but the main thing I do want to communicate is that our main effort was to put out 2 updates that we could make available for accumulations of our latest knowledge, latest thoughts on the Penny Point situation. And those, for a national estuary program, in my opinion, went very almost viral. Collecting a lot of shares, and it was just great to see those numbers behind us. Website did great as it's been for quite some time. One of the most important resources or tools that I think we put into effect was our link tree, which is essentially a static link that offers up a dynamic set of links. This was really great on a daily basis. We needed to put up some new information, some new resources. It's a great tool to use. We had some good numbers for email signups, Unsplash photo sharing platform. We made available some of our high quality photos to these press requests, journalists, and partners as well. And then looking at the cumulative metrics from March 30th to present, that's on the next slide. Present actually a week ago from today. In total, we had 60 media requests, not just from Penny Point, but we also managed to talk about our Treasury Waters project, some of the seagrass results, and we had conversations with college students about microplastics. We gained a total of 310 new followers across all of our social media channels, totaling nearly just about 43,000 users across Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter have seen this content. So volume was extremely loud in this reporting period. And then we had 86 new contacts signed up to our email list. So that's an indication that not only will they have engaged with this content in this period, but they'll stick with us for a while. Some of the quarterly or monthly publications that we have to take. Team effort.
One final staff update. There's your. I'm in the back. Thanks, Ed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our seagrass results recently, and this is highly convergent with most of the conversations we've been having today on water quality. And I think it also highlights the value of the series of long-term data sets that we have and continue to collect information on for the Bay. Marcus and I were giving a webinar yesterday talking primarily about the seagrass transect monitoring project. It's been going on since 1997, and we've been gathering the data, and then Marcus is putting it in the open science platform. And we're celebrating our 30th anniversary right now, but it's actually, I was just thinking about this, it's the 50th anniversary of the Environmental Protection Council's monitoring of water quality in the system. They started in 1971 with synoptic water quality monitoring in the system. And this helps inform our what we know today about Piney Point, what we know today about red tide. Without this foundational information, we would be in a lot more difficult place than we are right now. And so the Water Management District last month at the Southwest Florida Seagrass Working Group meeting released the 2020 seagrass data. And we actually, this was actually bad news for both ourselves, Sarasota Bay, and Charlotte Harbor. We lost Tampa Bay, including Bogue Ciega, Manatee River and Cockroach lost about 5,400 acres of seagrasses between 2018 and 2020. This is provisional data right now. Hoping to finalize either, I think, later this month or early next. That represents about 13% of the seagrasses that we had in the system in 2018. A large part of that, about 60%, 3,200 acres, was in Old Tampa Bay. We think this is related to a couple of different issues, including the recurring summertime pyrididium blooms we've seen there over the past 20 years, along with algae and potentially some of the circulation issues that are caused basically by the arterial blockage that is the 4 different causeways, the Andy Bridge, et cetera, that go over Old Tampa Bay and prevent natural circulation. So that's the bad news part of it. It has the results up on the screen right now. But this is an opportunity for us to still recognize that we are head and shoulders above where we were in the early 1980s. We were at about 22,000 acres then, we're 35,000 now. So we've still come a long way, but it helps us to remind ourselves that we still need to not lose sight of that valuable resource and continue to do the nitrogen reductions that have been part and parcel for the seagrass successes over the past decades. That's what I have. Thank you. Glad to take any questions.
Thank you for that report. It's daunting and it really is unfortunate. I will tell you that at Swiftman, we were talking about the interface of causeways and blocking off flow water. And one of the things that we brought up in discussion that is not within our control, but I'm just going to put it out there for everybody to be thinking about. When engineers design elements like roads that block water flow, there are ways that you can put transfer ducts in there for the water just flows. Imagine just an open pipe, like a sleeve running in the landmass space of that, ground approach road. It allows water to flow, so we really don't have to block the land the entire time that we are approaching the span. And I think that the more people are aware of that engineering option, and it's not necessarily the easiest or the least expensive, otherwise we would already be doing it. But if we start asking about it and having conversations about lateral flows through land masses, I think we can do more impact and try to resolve the issue. I know that we did talk about that. Again, it's not our purview, but I think the conversation, the height awareness is always big.
And we have definitely been having those conversations with multiple partners. I think one of the examples that we're trying to follow right now is on the Courtney Campbell Causeway near Rocky Point, where they did open up the causeway a couple of years ago, and we're looking at the water quality, looking at the seagrasses in that system to use that as proof of concept.
Exactly the same issue.
Thank you, Eric. Anything else on that?
That's it.
That's it. Well, as we wrap it up, I want to just thank our staff. Beyond the extraordinary things that happen day to day, you all do an amazing job representing us and doing the good work for the people. And so I just want to say thank you. And then you add on top of that, we have extraordinary circumstances that call you to do even more. That's why we're here, and that's why we have so much faith in you all. And again, I just want to say thank you for the job well done. Okay. With that, is there anything else for the good of the order? Then we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
I got stacked out.
We've been meeting secrets until you came on board.
Good seeing
Trying to do.
airspace control